So the topic today is sourcing from India. So unleashing the potential of sourcing outside China. And China is definitely not the only place to source. And it really depends on the product category where we should be sourcing from. Typically, as I mentioned, like if it's plastic or whatever, that plastic is usually going to be most cost effective from China. But why should we actually take a look in India as well? So today we are going to be talking about the advantages and disadvantages, how to manage quality control, where to source and not source Indian suppliers, and how to verify these suppliers, how to make sure that they are actually the business that they claim to be, and so on. And basically the same things that we do for when we are sourcing from China or any other place. By the way, who has any experience in sourcing from China? Let me know in the chat if you have sourced anything from India. Or is it a new market, new country for everyone in terms of sourcing? So yeah, let's talk a bit about the advantages. It's pretty much like cost-effective labor and production costs. So those are the same reasons that we take a look usually in China. But unsurprisingly, the country has skilled workers who can produce goods at lower price than in many other manufacturing countries. So India is increasingly looking attractive for those businesses that are price sensitive. And pretty much everyone is price sensitive, right? So we can have better margin. The thing is that with China, it really depends, like also in terms of the product category. But a lot of the costs are actually been increasing, and the labor costs have been increasing, and they are already at the same level as some of the European countries. So there's been a bit of a shift happening and going on in China, and it hasn't been sudden at all. It's been progressing and slowly. Another advantage is actually handmade production. So India is one of the largest handicrafts exporting country and clear leader in the handicrafts, both in terms of volume and value. And then country has something to offer for everyone, from textiles and handicrafts to machinery and electronics for almost every product type. So it's not like you go only one thing to source from there. So actually a smart way to approach is that to just take into consideration that what you're already selling, what you're already like sourcing, and then look into the options that you can actually get from from India regarding your products. Like, are there suppliers that are like manufacturing these products that you already have? And then what is the cost, and what are what is the overall cost in terms of manufacturing, shipping, quality inspections, and every other cost that we are basically doing already in the country that you are sourcing it from. And another advantage is really like this English proficiency. So it used to be, it has this British history. So obviously it's home to English-speaking people. So this makes it easier to communicate with suppliers compared to those in China or Vietnam who may be less proficient in English. And actually, let's face it, like pretty much none of the real factories, real suppliers like speak English in China. If they speak in English, they are typically going to be either like trading agent or wholesale business, or some other business that is basically just buying the stuff from manufacturers. So they are not manufacturers themselves. They are basically a middleman, which isn't always a bad case. I mean, we are actually using, we have been using like trading agents ourselves as well, because in many of the cases, I mean, they have been just being able to provide like better customer service, better overall experience than the actual manufacturers. So in some cases, it actually makes sense to even use a middleman. So even though there's a middleman, it's not always a negative thing. So it really we really need to take into consideration that, hey, okay, how much cost is this middleman adding, and other things as well. But still, from India, it's actually possible to find the suppliers who speak in English. Then quality controls. What are the different like disadvantages when sourcing from India? So in comparison to China, I mean, the Indian suppliers tend to have less advanced technology and less standardization of their process, making inconsistency more prevalent. And that's really the thing, like in terms of manufacturing. It's about like standardization and doing really higher volumes. And when you're doing higher volumes, I mean, it's all about consistency, so that you're able to produce the same product in the same quality when you're talking about like millions of units. So when there's inconsistency, then that means that we have to take additional steps, additional effort in quality control, so that we really get the quality that we are looking for. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, there are going to be like fewer selection of suppliers. When comparing China, I mean, there are fewer product categories that as a buyer, we can actually choose from. And additionally, many of these suppliers have limited presence online. So it's in that case, it's not so different from China, like where basically a lot of the suppliers are not present in these websites like Alibaba and so on. But that's actually the case in most countries. I mean, it's the same thing in US. Like if you're looking into like real factories, real manufacturing, so suppliers and so on. I mean, often they don't have any online presence at all. So you're lucky if you can actually find any kind of website from them. So that's pretty, and the reason is typically because they're just focused on the manufacturing business, and they already have all these clients that they are working for and so on. Yeah, Darius is asking about the different websites, and we will get to those in a bit. And then another disadvantage is actually shipping cost. So the shipping cost from India can actually sometimes be relatively higher because of the shipping infrastructure and logistics industry. I mean, it's still developing and it faces certain challenges, including this kind of port congestion, bureaucratic processes, and infrastructure limitations. And of course, I mean, we have seen similar cases in different ports in China, even US, California, LA, Long Beach. But I mean, that's usually going to be like a temporary congestion. But here, it is when it lacks this standardization and it lacks really this infrastructure, then obviously we are going to be experiencing some usually I mean delays in during the process. So that's just something that we need to take into consideration. And whenever there's a risk like this, that hey, I mean, shipping costs might actually take a bit longer than they promised, then we just need to be prepared for that and make sure that when a delay happens here and there, then it's not going to destroy the whole product opportunity. So how can we actually manage this quality control? Well, I mean, one thing is sample evaluation. So it's the same thing that we do pretty much every supplier, no matter where they are from. But the thing is that instead of just relying solely on these physical samples, I mean, we can actually be in contact with them via Zoom, WhatsApp, or whatever. I mean, as long as it's video calls, and just to get them to show these different samples. So we are actually able to inspect and evaluate samples. That's pretty, I mean, that's zero cost way how to ask a supplier to showcase a sample on camera. So you can actually examine it from different angles and even request to see some specific details. Then packaging inspection, how do you actually do that? Well, I mean, obviously the same thing that you can do it online. So meaning that, and this is especially true if we want to see some packaging like before we are making any decisions, meaning that before we have made any orders regarding what kind of product packaging is going to be and how are they going to ship it and so on. I mean, just to give us a bit of a more control and comfort in being comfortable in ordering from them. And but because the main thing is really that we want to be as prepared as possible, and we want to we don't want to be in a situation that we already made an order and okay, now is the time that we actually do this quality inspection. So at this stage, we are still like in the situation where we are vetting the different suppliers, meaning that before we have even made any kind of order, so we can already at that phase start like asking, I mean, just have a quick call with them and ask them to show this and that, just to basically further like evaluate this supplier. So we can ask them to show different kinds of packaging, including its thickness, how the product fits inside, and all I mean, that kind of stuff. Pretty much, I mean, no matter what kind of product it is, what's a product category or whatever, I mean, it's going to be having this, you're able to ask to see different kinds of packaging that can fit it and so on, and the thickness and so on, and how it looks, and how will they actually package it when it goes overseas. Obviously, when it comes that we have already decided to do business with them, then it's the same thing as we do with every other supplier, no matter if it's from China, Europe, US, Canada, whatever. I mean, we're going to be using inspection companies. So that's really a crucial thing in order to avoid headache that can come later on. So it's really a crucial step in managing the quality control is doing these like on-site inspections of the products before they are shipped. Typically, I mean, it's not going to be different from the process that we do otherwise, because I mean, usually we can have it at any stage during the product cycle, meaning that before production, during production, pre-shipment, and to container and loading inspections. But if you are just going to be doing one inspection, then the minimum should be, I mean, before it's being shipped, because if you ship it, then it's going to be too late to fix all the issues. Like I remember, like I saw some sellers doing the inspection, like for example in US, and come on, I mean, what are you going to do if you find like severe issues? I mean, it might be that you have to ditch the whole batch. So just imagine like how much money you spend on that batch if you find one issue in every single unit. So meaning that it's basically unsellable. So I mean, then you just basically have no other option to cut your losses. So there's a good luck in getting the supplier to compensate for every single unit, right? So that's why, I mean, we do the inspection at the states, I mean, latest before the shipment. And that's really the latest stage to do any kind of inspection. But typically, ideally, we want to do several different inspections, meaning before production, during production, pre-shipment to container, and then loading inspections as well. I mean, it also depends on the value of the shipment. So if you're just shipping like if you're not shipping that many units, then it doesn't really make sense that we would do like 5 inspections, right? So it's more about taking the consideration. I mean, just basic risk management. That okay, how much are we going to lose? How in maximum, and basically how much does it make sense that we should be spending on in the quality inspection, and like what's the worst case scenario that can happen? I mean, if we don't do any inspection at all, then I mean it might happen that there's some critical issue, and I mean Amazon is just going to reject that shipment. So it's basically total loss, the shipment. I mean the batch. So that's kind of like the worst case scenario. So you need to take into consideration how much risk are you able to handle, and then how to mitigate it. Like Daria asked, where to find these Indian suppliers. So there's actually several different options. And Darius was asking about Alibaba, and actually you can find some Indian suppliers from there as well. But there's this separate sites for this, including like India Sourcing Network. So indiasourcing.net. So here is a website where you can find a bunch of different categories, from home products, gifts, furnishing, fabrics, apparel, bags, fashion, accessories, and so on. And they do have their own kind of like vetting service and stuff like that, and then trusted service providers. So in that case, I mean, it's pretty similar to what Alibaba is doing as well. They even have this like own services where they can recommend these companies to support the sourcing and basically the Amazon business. So there's sourcing agencies, packaging, inspection, logistics, photos, videography, warehouse, payments, and so on. And as mentioned, I mean, it's possible to find some of this in Alibaba as well. I mean, some Indian suppliers. So if you're basically already using it, I mean, you can just have a look at, okay, I'm already like selling this and this product. So what would actually India have to offer? And in some cases, it might be that if you're just looking at Alibaba, that they basically have nothing better to offer for your product in question. So it really comes down to the product category and the product specifics, that including that, like what are the different ingredients, what's the fabrics, and is it some textile, and whatever is used in the product. Then another website is this Global Sources. So it's basically just another option that you can use to find these suppliers. And another one which basically you should not use is this India mark. And the reason that you shouldn't use it is because it is mainly for the domestic market, mainly for buyers in India, which means that basically a lot of these are just wholesalers. So none of these are actually suppliers. None of these are actually like entities that manufacture these products by themselves. So they just buy it from them, from other parties, meaning that if you use this site, then you're just likely to be using the middleman which means increased prices and so on. But I mean, as I mentioned, it's not always bad to use a middleman. So it really depends on overall that is there some good reason like why you should use that middleman in question? Like, are they able to provide something that the manufacturer cannot in that case? Then let's talk about shipping. So I remember like first time we saw something from China. I mean, this was first time doing it, and when we sent the quality inspection company to visit them when they had like, I mean, we had already paid for the deposit, and it was basically ready to be shipped. So they were just inventory was just waiting there for the final payment. But obviously, I mean, before making the final payment, we wanted to have a quality inspection. So we just we sent just the details about everything to the quality inspection company, like what we want them to inspect, and the address of the supplier and so on. And the funny thing was that the quality inspection company told us, like after they visited the place, that come on, like guys, why did you choose this factory? Or because I mean it's middle of nowhere. I mean it's gonna take them the whole day for one guy just to visit. So it's not gonna be like 2 hours, 3 hours. No, it's gonna be like the whole day. Is just they're gonna spend the whole day because it's so far away. So that's something that I mean this was our pretty much some of the first products we saw. So that wasn't something that we were even considering. It didn't even cross our mind that the location of the supplier actually matters. So obviously, yes, we learned that the location of the supplier matters in terms of not only in terms of like quality inspection and how far it is and so, but I mean in terms of shipping as well, because if it's really far away in an inconvenient location, then that's going to actually increase the cost, and it might be pretty significant cost in terms of shipping. So that's something to take into consideration. And the same thing is to consider when we are sourcing from India. So shipping to the East Coast is more time efficient as the ships take shorter route through Suez Canal, whereas shipping to the West Coast may involve additional stops and longer transit times. So this means that where the location where we are actually shipping those. And I mean, when we create a shipment plan in Seller Central, I mean, it doesn't usually give us an option to determine that, hey, what is the address that you want to use? What is the fulfillment warehouse that you want to use? No, I mean, it's usually that, okay, here's the address, here's the shipment plan, and that's where you're going to be shipping all these different units. And the thing is with Amazon is that if you actually don't follow the shipping plan that they give you, meaning that you would kind of like choose on, let's say that they give you like 3 different addresses, and let's say that you violate the shipping plan and instead send everything to one address, then in that case, I mean, it's going to mess up the systems with Amazon, and they're going to penalize you for that, because there's a reason why they give these specific addresses at these certain times, because they just want to optimize for the best customer experience, meaning that it would be always as close as possible to the customer. But that of course means that if we have to ship to West Coast, then from India, then it's going to involve additional stops and longer transit times. But typically, well, it really depends on the volume. But if you're doing like bigger volumes, you're not going to be shipping directly to Amazon. Instead, we are going to be using like freight forwarders and so on. Then tariffs. I mean, India generally has lower tariffs compared to China, but it's really essential to compare the HS code and the tariff rates between these two countries to really evaluate the cost savings. Because again, I mean, it depends on the product category, it depends on the product. So how, like, because I mean, typically countries, and it's not only for US, I mean, it applies to like other countries as well. I mean, that the country can be protective for more for some industries than other. And for example, I remember that even in Finland, I mean, Finland was protective of its own textile industry, which meant that they actually controlled how much textile you can import to Finland. And then they just added these tolls and tariffs, you know, to basically smoke these outsiders from the domestic market. But they actually shut it down. I mean, shut down the requirements in the 80s, which eventually meant that, I mean, the whole textile industry, I mean, the domestic manufacturing, I mean, it collapsed because it wasn't able to compete with all these different other countries who have like much lower like labor cost and stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons like why I mean, why countries do that, why countries might protect certain industries. But luckily, I mean, it's going, there's less and less like protectionism if you at least compare to like decades ago, meaning like, for example, in the 80s. But I mean, still we need to like look into these specific codes in question that, hey, so what kind of code we should be using. And that's actually another point, that you should make sure that you use the right code when you are importing your goods. And it doesn't really make sense that we would become like the experts in this topic. I mean, it makes much more sense that we just use different experts. So when we are importing something, and when we are actually shipping something, when we are working with like freight forwarders, we should just like, you know, have a discussion with them and use their expertise to teach us that, hey, what are the different codes we should use, and like what happens during the process, and is there something that we can actually optimize to lower the cost and then increase our profitability, right? Then it's really important to, you know, determine the core strengths and capabilities. So some suppliers may offer a wide range of products, but may excel in specific areas, and it's essential to identify what they specialize in and have experience with. So it's exactly the same thing that we do when we are sourcing from China. So when we are actually evaluating this supplier, we look into it that, hey, what are all the different products that this supplier manufactures, and what is it that they're actually specializing in? Because I mean, if they wouldn't specialize in anything and they would just do all random products depending what you ask for, then I mean, obviously it's not a very good sign. Like when you're sourcing from China, you need to make sure that the company actually has export license, meaning that they are able to like move these, basically have the necessary paperwork just to be able to get the products out of the country. So meaning that it's export focused. So it's really important that we work with suppliers who understand the needs of overseas markets and have this import export code. So IEC. And I mean, I guess maybe some would say that I mean, if these companies are already listed in these different kind of websites that are targeting overseas shipments and so on, that they would already have it. But I mean, obviously, we want to make sure of it, so we don't want to end up with any surprises or anything like this. And what is typical for a lot of suppliers, and I mean, it applies to India as well, that many of these India suppliers do not maintain updated websites. So it makes much more sense that we request a catalog from them just to see their latest products. And it's typical that, I mean, these suppliers have their product catalog. So that's just an easy way how to check that what are they actually selling and what are the different categories and what are they specialized in and so on. Basically, once you're like evaluating the supplier, I mean, you should get as much information about the supplier as possible. And one thing is to check their CST number online, which you can do on this website, to really make sure that they are who they say they are, and they verify all these business details. And it can also show that if they're really being consistent in filing their goods and services taxes and so on. I mean, just to make sure that there's not going to be any surprises along the way.